The morning was slow and gentle, the sunlight barely filtering through the dusty glass of the electronics store as the line wound its predictable path toward the registers. Robert, a quiet Vietnam veteran with deep lines etched on his face and hands that still trembled ever so slightly despite years of service, stood near the entrance, his cane tapping softly on the tiled floor. He wore a faded blue vest that once symbolized honor and commitment, now a reminder of a past where he was respected not just for his uniform, but for the kindness he carried inside. As customers trickled in, he offered a nod or a gentle smile, his eyes crinkling in a way that spoke of unspoken stories and sacrifices made long ago. When JD Vance walked in with the purposeful stride of a man on a mission, Robert instinctively stepped aside without a hint of hesitation or thought of consequence. With a tender voice, he murmured, "Go on, son, you've probably got places to be." A simple act of respect that flowed from years of understanding the value of letting others move forward. In that quiet moment, as JD advanced toward the counter with a slight, appreciative smile, Robert's gesture was as natural as the turning of a page in a well-loved book. Yet, unseen by Robert, the shift in the day wasn't entirely about the passage of time or the meeting of kind souls. From the back of the store, hidden behind a line of pristine shelves stocked with gleaming gadgets and blinking consoles, the new manager observed everything. Her eyes, cold and calculating, missed nothing. And while most customers were lost in their own thoughts or the latest electronic marvel, she saw what she considered a disruption, an unnecessary breach of protocol. In her mind, the order and rules of the business were sacrosanct, and no act, no matter how gentle or well-intentioned, was allowed to undermine them. The manager's gaze lingered a beat too long on Robert's fleeting smile and the extra moment he had taken to let JD pass ahead, as if marking a deviation from a script she had written in her head. In that silent scrutiny, the weight of her disapproval began to form a dark cloud overhead, one that would soon cast a long shadow over the morning's brief display of decency. Robert, unaware of the storm gathering behind him, continued to watch the line with a warm detachment, his heart ever gentle despite the scars of the past. And JD, slightly puzzled but thankful for the courtesy, stepped forward with the easy grace of someone who had always known that sometimes doing the right thing meant simply letting someone go ahead, even if it was just one small step back for a veteran. And all it took was a quiet moment of compassion in an otherwise ordinary day. The line moved on like nothing had happened, just another transaction after another. But the air had shifted, tightened. Behind the counter, the beeping of scanners and low chatter continued. But near the front of the store, where the quiet mattered more, the energy snapped cold. Robert had just returned to his post, standing a little straighter than usual, cane resting softly against his side as he watched JD Vance disappear into the aisles. A small smile played at the corners of his lips, the kind that comes from doing something you didn't have to do but were glad you did. And then she came, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp and voice clipped. The new manager didn't walk. She marched. Her shoes struck the floor with too much purpose for a place that sold headphones and gaming chairs, and she didn't waste a second with pleasantries. "Robert," she said, her tone laced with authority that didn't need to be earned, only imposed. He turned toward her, surprised. "Yes, ma'am." "What you just did was a disruption," she said, flipping a page on her clipboard, though she didn't need to read it. "That's not your role. You are not authorized to adjust the customer queue." Robert blinked, confused. "You mean letting that gentleman go ahead? He didn't even ask. I just figured." "That's not your call to make," she snapped. "We have systems in place. Predictability, standards. When you interrupt that, even for something small, you throw the entire flow off." Robert swallowed hard, the smile long gone. He looked like he was in a hurry. "I was just trying to be respectful. It wasn't company time, just there are no exceptions," she said, cutting him off again. "Not for respect, not for age, not for your personal values. You're here to greet and direct, not to decide." The words hit harder than they should have, not because they were loud, but because of how quiet they made him feel. Robert's hand tightened around the curve of his cane. "I've been here 4 years," he said, voice calm but low. "Never been written up, never caused a problem."
The manager's expression didn't change. She tapped the clipboard once. This isn't personal, it's policy, and you've been warned before about informal behavior. Consider this the final note. You're done. Turn in your vest. The words hung in the air like static. A few customers glanced over, sensing something off, but quickly looking away. Robert stood there, shoulders slowly collapsing under the weight of something heavier than just humiliation. He reached for the buttons on his vest, undoing them slowly, each one a little harder than the last. When he finally slipped it off and folded it over his arm, he looked smaller somehow. "I didn't mean to disrespect the store," he said quietly. The manager had already turned her back. "We don't make exceptions." And just like that, the man who had once stood between two worlds, service and silence, was now neither employee nor veteran in their eyes. Just another body exiting quietly through the front doors, as if the years he gave and the man he still was had all been forgotten in a single heartless sentence. JD was halfway down the aisle, scanning the shelves for a charger he didn't really need when the tone behind him changed. It wasn't the sound of customer service. It was colder, clipped, managerial. He paused, one hand still hovering over a display of headphones, the other reaching for his phone out of habit. Then he heard it. "Turn in your vest." That made him turn, slowly, calmly, like a man not surprised, but no longer willing to ignore what his gut had already told him. His eyes found Robert instantly, the old man standing stiff near the sliding doors, unpinning his name tag with fingers that shook just enough to betray what his face wouldn't show. The manager stood a foot away, arms crossed over her clipboard like a shield, her voice ringing out again with clinical finality. "We don't make exceptions." JD stepped forward, steady, measured. Not rushing, but unmistakable. A few customers glanced up from their carts as he approached, sensing something shifting. JD stopped just short of them, eyes locking onto the managers with a cool precision. "You firing him for letting me go ahead?" She blinked, caught off guard, then straightened. "Sir, this is a matter between the employee and the store. I'm the customer he let through," JD replied, his tone quiet but loaded. "Seems like I'm part of it." The manager's jaw tightened. "This isn't personal. It's about policy. Our employees are expected to follow protocol at all times. That includes maintaining the flow of customers. He disrupted that." JD glanced at Robert, who was now holding his folded vest like it was something sacred. "He stepped aside, that's all. He let someone move ahead in line, me. You're calling that a disruption?" "It's not your place to judge our internal standards," she replied. "We've spoken to him before. There's a pattern of informal behavior. We run a professional environment here." JD's eyes didn't flinch. "You run a store, he served in a war, and you're firing him over one moment of basic human decency?" Her lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing. JD reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, not to threaten, not to posture, but with the quiet certainty of someone who knew the weight of evidence. He unlocked it, turned the camera on, and lifted it. "Just want to get this right," he said. "A veteran greets customers, lets one pass out of kindness, and you fire him. That's the company line?" "Sir, please don't record." "Then maybe stop saying things worth recording," JD cut in. The tension snapped like glass underfoot. A couple of nearby customers stepped closer, subtly angling their phones too. JD looked back at Robert, whose face was a mixture of pride and exhaustion. "Don't worry," JD said, not taking his eyes off the lens. "We're not letting this disappear quietly." And just like that, the story wasn't just happening. It had started spreading. The video wasn't flashy. It didn't need editing, music, or a title card. It was raw, quiet, and sharp, just over 30 seconds long. Long enough to show Robert standing still, vest folded in his arms like a flag too heavy to carry. Long enough to catch the clipped authority in the manager's voice as she dismissed decades of service with corporate detachment. And long enough to catch JD Vance still filming, his voice cutting through the awkward silence of a store that suddenly felt colder than the air conditioning. "Do you even know who that man is?" he asked, eyes fixed on her with the weight of a question that didn't need answering, but deserved to be heard. The manager faltered for a beat. "He's a former employee, and this isn't appropriate." "No," JD said, stepping closer. "What's inappropriate is firing someone who fought for this." Country because he let me go ahead in line. What's inappropriate is throwing a man out like expired stock because you can't see past your clipboard. A few more customers had stopped browsing. A mother held her child's hand a little tighter. A man in work boots pulled his phone out slowly, recording without a word. JD pointed at Robert, not theatrically, not dramatically, just pointed. That man wore a uniform before you ever had a name tag. He stood guard so you could stand here today, and you fired him. For what? For being decent? The manager, face flushed, shook her head slightly. This is store policy. It's not about personal history. It's about professionalism. No, JD said again, quieter now. It's about respect. Something you clearly haven't earned and definitely don't give. The manager turned, trying to retreat into the back office, but her steps were too quick, too loud. JD didn't follow. He didn't need to. He turned the phone toward himself, his expression calm but resolute. This is Robert. He let me cut the line today, not because I'm anyone special, but because he's someone decent. He served in Vietnam, helped raise 3 kids, never once asked for thanks. Today, he lost his job for doing the right thing. This isn't about policy, it's about principle. He ended the recording with one tap. Robert stood there, still unmoving, his eyes fixed on the floor as if trying to find balance in a world that had shifted beneath his feet. JD walked over, gently placed a hand on his shoulder. We're not letting this slide, he said. Not today. Robert looked up, eyes glassy but clear. I didn't mean to cause trouble. JD shook his head. You didn't cause trouble. You reminded people what respect looks like, and now they're going to remember your name. He slipped the phone into his pocket and exhaled. The video was ready, but what it started, that was just beginning. JD sat alone at his desk that night, the glow of the screen casting soft shadows across his face as he watched the raw clip one last time. He didn't add music. He didn't edit the pacing. He didn't need to. The video spoke in the language of truth. Robert's steady hands unpinning his name tag, the manager's flat declaration of no exceptions, and JD's own voice, calm but weighted, asking the question that wouldn't go away. Do you know who that man is? He uploaded it without a headline grab, just one line typed beneath it like a quiet gut punch. A veteran stepped aside for me, so they stepped over him. And then he hit post. What happened next moved faster than even JD expected. Within 30 minutes, the comments started to roll in. Within 2 hours, it was trending. By sunrise, it was everywhere. People weren't just watching the video, they were feeling it. Veterans from across the country chimed in with their own stories. He reminds me of my dad, one wrote. My grandpa used to greet at Walmart after Korea. He'd give candy to the kids, another said. Some told of being overlooked, dismissed, thanked only once a year with a lukewarm handshake. Others simply wrote, that could have been me. The reaction wasn't outrage. It was heartbreak, carried by a wave of collective memory. Robert, in that 30-second clip, had become more than a man. He was a mirror, and people didn't like what they saw reflecting back. JD refreshed the page, watching the numbers climb. 100,000 views, 200, a million. The comment that stopped him cold came from a young man with a profile picture in uniform. I don't cry easy, but that man stood taller in silence than most do behind a podium. JD shared that one. With it, he added a follow-up post. We're working on something for Robert, but this isn't just about him. It's about every man and woman who quietly holds the door, lets you go ahead, and never asks for anything in return. That kind of character shouldn't be punished. It should be protected. News outlets picked it up next. Local first, then national. By noon, a producer from a morning show had called JD's assistant asking for an interview. Can we meet Robert? They asked. Can we tell his story? But JD didn't respond yet. He wasn't looking for spotlight. He was looking for a solution. And he knew the attention would be useless unless it changed something real. Meanwhile, back in his small apartment, Robert sat quietly in his recliner, the vest still folded on his lap, unaware of the tidal wave forming in his name. He didn't own a smartphone. He didn't have Twitter. But his phone rang more that night than it had in months. Old friends, fellow vets, strangers from different states. "Is this the Robert in the video?" they asked. And in his soft, unsure voice, he replied, "Yeah, I guess it is." JD sat at his dining table surrounded by old records, printed emails, and handwritten notes from people who knew Robert long before a clipboard manager tried to erase him. He'd spent the better part of the day making calls, listening more than talking, piecing together the story that should have been known long before a viral video forced the world to care. What he found wasn't surprising, but it was sobering. Robert wasn't just a store greeter. He was a man who'd quietly dedicated his life to service, not just once in uniform, but again and again after the medals were tucked away in a drawer. He had volunteered at the local VA hospital for years, driving other veterans to appointments on his days off, sometimes waiting in the parking lot for hours just to make sure they got home safely. He'd helped organize fundraisers for service dogs, not for recognition, but because those dogs save more lives than people know, he once told a friend. And perhaps the most telling detail, he'd never once called in sick during his 4 years at the store. Not once. Not when his hip ached from an old injury. Not when his eyes burned from nights he couldn't sleep. Not even when his brother passed away last spring. He showed up. Every time. JD leaned back in his chair, staring at the fading photo someone had mailed him. Robert, in his early 20s, in full dress blues, standing beside a fellow soldier with arms slung over each other's shoulders like brothers. The caption on the back was written in careful block letters. "We made it back." Not all did. JD turned the photo over slowly and picked up the phone again. This time, he wasn't calling to ask for a favor. He was setting something in motion. A few hours later, he met Robert at a quiet cafe near the edge of town. The place was empty except for a small camera crew JD had arranged. Not flashy, not network, just a two-man team with heart and the ability to listen. Robert arrived wearing the same jacket he'd worn at the store, the same calm posture, but this time his eyes held something heavier. Like the weight of being seen after years of being overlooked was almost too much to carry. JD greeted him with a firm handshake and a warm smile. "We're not here for a job," he said. "We're here for your story." Robert shifted in his seat, visibly unsure. "I'm not used to talking about myself," he said quietly. "That's okay," JD replied. "You've already done more than most ever will. I just want people to know it." The camera light blinked on. Robert took a deep breath. And slowly, piece by piece, he began to share. Not just what had happened, but who he was before the vest, before the clipboard, before the world tried to make him small. And in that cafe, with the world watching through a single lens, Robert stopped being a greeter. He became a legacy. The corporate office tried to get ahead of it the way they always did, with a drafted apology wrapped in neutral language and a press release that danced around accountability like it was optional. The statement appeared on the company's social media accounts 2 days after the video exploded. "We are aware of an incident involving a former employee and are conducting an internal review. We remain committed to our values of inclusivity and respect." But no names were mentioned. No actions were taken. And most importantly, no apology was actually made to Robert. JD read it twice, jaw tightening. It was the kind of response that treated outrage like a PR fire, not a human story. But this wasn't just about strategy. It was about a man who gave more to the world than he ever asked in return and got tossed out like he was nothing. JD wasn't going to let it slide. He posted again, but this time it wasn't the original clip. It was something different, something worse. It was a second video. This one from a customer who'd filmed it months ago and sent it to JD after seeing the story break. The footage showed Robert in the same blue vest, kneeling beside a young boy with autism who had gone into sensory overload in the middle of the store. The mother is panicked, crouched next to her son, unsure what to do. But Robert, calm and steady, sits beside the boy, gently tapping a rhythm on the floor, speaking softly, helping him find his breath again. Within minutes, the boy's tears stop. He clutches Robert's hand like an anchor. The moment is simple, beautiful, and undeniable. JD captioned it with 12 words. "That's who you fired. Now what are you going to do about it?" The clip hit like a tidal wave. The apology post was flooded with comments. Thousands. people tagging the CEO by name, veterans groups issuing statements, parents of children with disabilities sharing it like gospel. And by the end of the day, JD's phone finally rang. It wasn't a PR assistant, it wasn't a publicist, it was the CEO. Himself. JD let it ring twice before answering. "You've got my attention," the CEO said. "That's a start," JD replied. There was silence on the other end. Then the CEO exhaled. "We want to make this right." JD didn't miss a beat. "You can't undo what happened, but you can decide what happens next. You saw that clip. You saw the man you discarded like he was just another shift to fill. He wasn't. He mattered, and now the world knows it. We're willing to offer him his job back." "No," JD interrupted. "This isn't about a job. This is about dignity. He's not going back to punch a clock for people who didn't see him the first time. You want to make it right? Then you're going to listen, and you're going to show up." The line went quiet again. Then, "Tell me what that looks like." JD leaned back in his chair, eyes steady. "It starts with a vest, but not yours." The parking lot was packed by noon, sun high and glaring off windshields, but no one seemed to mind. Families stood shoulder to shoulder, veterans in faded jackets lined the front row, and news vans parked at the curb hummed softly behind their extended antennas. A temporary stage had been set up just outside the store. Ironic, really, that the same building that once dismissed Robert in silence now stood as the backdrop for something louder. JD Vance stood center stage, no teleprompter, no corporate sponsor banners behind him. Just a microphone in one hand and a folded vest in the other. The crowd quieted as he stepped up. His voice carried without force, low and steady, every word chosen. "A few weeks ago," he began, "a man held a door for me. He let me go ahead in line, said I probably had places to be. It was a small moment, one that most people would forget, but it wasn't small to me, and it wasn't small to him." He paused, scanning the crowd until his eyes found Robert, standing just off to the side, unsure, his old cane in one hand, the same posture of quiet dignity he'd carried from day one. "That man was fired," JD continued, "for doing what most people wouldn't even notice. But that's the thing about quiet decency. It only looks small until you try to remove it. Then you realize it was holding everything up." A few people clapped, then more. Then it quieted again as JD held up the vest. It wasn't blue like the store uniform. It was dark gray, with an embroidered patch over the heart that read, "Valor Works Foundation." JD looked at Robert. "This isn't a job offer," he said. "It's a mission. We started something new, something built for veterans who gave more than they got. It's a foundation that trains, hires, and honors the ones who've been left behind. And we want you to be the first." The moment hung in the air like a held breath. JD extended the vest. Cameras clicked. Phones captured. And slowly Robert stepped forward. No music played. No confetti fell. But when he reached the stage, when he took that vest in both hands and looked out at the crowd, the sound of the applause was like thunder. JD leaned in, just enough for Robert to hear him. "You weren't rehired," he said quietly. "You were remembered." Robert nodded, eyes glassy but proud, and lifted the vest above his head for just a moment before slipping it on. The fit wasn't perfect, but the message was. Behind him, a new banner was raised. "Every veteran has a place here." The manager who had once dismissed him didn't show. The store issued a formal apology later that day. But by then, no one was listening to them. They were listening to Robert, and for the first time in a long time, he was finally being heard. The sky was soft and gray, the kind of weather that asked nothing from you, just wrapped itself around the day and let things be. JD Vance pulled into the parking lot slowly, no cameras in tow, no assistants checking his schedule. This wasn't about making a statement. It was about keeping a promise. The store looked the same from the outside. Glass panels reflecting the cloudy sky, cars scattered neatly across the pavement, a few customers pushing carts in and out like any other afternoon. But something inside had changed. JD stepped through the doors and was greeted not by security, not by store managers eager to appease, but by a familiar, quiet figure near the front. Robert was there, not in the old blue vest, but in the one stitched with gray and pride. Valor works. He stood near the new Welcome Center, next to a table filled with pamphlets on veteran support services, job placement programs, and local VA events. But today, he wasn't handing out information. He was just waiting. When he saw JD, he gave a small nod, that same quiet dignity never dulled by all that had happened. JD walked over, no urgency in his step, just a calm respect. They shook hands without words, the kind of grip that says more than conversation ever could. "You busy?" JD asked. Robert glanced at the quiet cafe tucked inside the store. "Just on break." They sat across from each other, nothing between them but a pair of lukewarm coffees and years of understanding. For a while, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. JD finally broke the silence, his voice low, honest. "That day, when you stepped aside and told me to go first, you weren't just being polite. You were standing up for something, maybe even for someone like me. What I did after? That wasn't a favor, that was returning one." Robert stared at his cup, then looked up, eyes steady and kind. "That's all we ever wanted. To know somebody would stand back for us too. Even just once." JD smiled faintly. The corners of his mouth touched with humility. They sat there a moment longer, letting the world pass by behind them. Families shopping, music humming overhead, the ordinary flowing around the extraordinary like it always had. Then a small movement caught JD's eye. A ladder being wheeled across the front of the store, a new banner being lifted into place above the main entrance. He stood slowly and nodded toward it. Robert turned just in time to see the fabric unfurl, stretched tight and clean above the sliding doors. Bold letters, easy to read. Veterans first. Always. Robert said nothing, but JD could see it in the way his shoulders relaxed, in the slight tremble of his lip, in the silence that said more than any podium ever could. They stood there side by side, two men from different worlds bound by the same truth, that sometimes the smallest stand changes the biggest things. Some stories don't begin with a headline. They start with a quiet gesture. One man stepping aside in a store line, offering a moment of grace without expecting anything in return. Robert didn't ask to be noticed. He didn't demand justice. But when his decency was punished, the world stood up beside him. And when JD Vance handed him that vest, it wasn't just a job. It was a declaration. You were never invisible. You were never small. Today, that store still opens its doors. But the first thing customers see now isn't a sale sign, it's a promise. Veterans first. Always. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that character still matters and that quiet integrity is worth defending, then this is just the beginning. We share true stories that bring justice to light, stories that show the power of standing up when it counts, and the people who prove that dignity isn't negotiable. Subscribe for more, because the next story might just start with someone like Robert and end with all of us standing a little taller.